Hi, welcome to the next edition of Sweet New List. Today, we're going to be covering the aggro decks, and immediately following this, I'm going to record another video for tomorrow, which will cover the non-aggro. Since there's, I would say about a total of 12 decks in total, I want to break it up into two different videos. So this one, there's a little bit more commonality between these decks here because, well, they're all aggro-oriented. So we're going to get into that one today, and of course, tomorrow we're going to cover the rest of them. Sorry, it's been a while since I did my last recording of this series. If you make sure you let me know down in the comment section if you love this content in general, especially since I do like the fact that covering unique decks does shine light on decks, hopefully amping their actual play rate in the format, making this format more diverse. Anything I could do with helping with that, I am happy to do it. So today, like I said, we got aggro decks. The first few maybe don't feature new cards, but I'm glad to see them back on the menu since the banning. So let's get into it. So first on my list, doesn't feature any new cards, but I'm happy to see Boros Koke again. This deck did die when Amalia was a top tier deck. It has kind of struggled to get its place, footing in that format. But I do like this deck as in general. I like the fact that it exists in Pioneer. It's one of those aggro decks that I think people really, it's for some people, it's not for everyone. And I think that's what I want to see in unique aggro strategies, right? I want to see different aggro approaches that may make some happy and some not. So at least everyone gets a taste of aggro in their own liking. And this is one of those decks I think is definitely different than most aggro decks. Since this deck is focused more on the Inspectors and the Epicures turn 1, trying to get a very early Glimful Demolition to hopefully get a Convoke turn 2. Locks it on turn 2 is your best draw for the aggressive one. Now, if you're facing Rattos or something like that, you definitely want to start off with a Knight Errant of Eos, just because it does give you more card draw. And against black base strategies with heavy amounts of removal, it's quite nice. This deck also has a big, nice plan B, which is Warden of the Inner Sky. You do make a lot of treasures and blood tokens and clues, so you can tap them, make it big. Scry. It's also, the scrying is very important. Since we do run only 20 lands in the deck, you do actively want to sometimes make sure you're scrying for those lands. Otherwise, you kind of get stuck there. That is something to keep in mind. That's why sometimes one of your best lines is the Warden turn 1, Inspector turn 2, tap down, scry. That way you can find the next land. Keep curving out. Now the main board on this one does have one case of the Gateway. It is basically in here instead of the 4th Recruiter, because it kind of acts as a 4th Recruiter, but also being a removal spell, which is something you kind of want, especially to answer an elf or a pesky big green creature. We also have 3 Thalias in the main board, because removal is quite potent, and this deck does do a horrible time against something like Lockdown. Now, when we reach the sideboard of this, we definitely change our overall structure. We got Devils for the small creatures and also against elves, so we can bring them in, cut back on, Epicures or something like that, bring in those because it still counts as a creature to actually, Convoke, while also being a decent little small removal spell. We do run a couple of volleys because Spirits, I think, is one of our worst matchups. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure. Also, it's pretty good against the Mirror because we also, their creatures, biggest creatures are 4/4s plus mono white humans. Also, because Adeline, you want to be able to hit that. And then we have our Deafening Silences for the Lotus Field matchup, and also you have it for the Phoenix matchup. Now, this deck does not typically play Graveyard Hate because it's not necessary. We are kind of just trying to get through them, not actually slow our game plan to address theirs, right? They have to interact with us first. So Silence is a very good tempo play to make sure we can still progress our aggressive strategy while delaying and hurting their ability to actually perform. Other than that, we have 2 invasions of Gomicons. It's really good against black-based decks. Less so against white-based decks, because white-based decks do have Lockdown and also Sunfall, stuff like that. So exile-based removal kind of hurts against a invasion, but black-based strategies, unless they're on Extinction Event, you're more likely to get, save your team against a Path of Peril. We have 3 Get Lost as a way to fight through big decks. Shieldred, very problematic card. That's quite nice. You don't really want to go too high on most matchups with those. I like to keep like maybe bring in 2 in certain matchups. Sometimes you do have to force 3, but I try to minimize that as much as possible, just due to the fact that it does slow your deck down a lot. You have 1 Redain, pushes off Rafts, and it's especially good against Sacrifice, where you want to prevent that 1 point of damage from the blasted Mayhem Devil. Very important there. And also against grinding matchups, one of my most preferred methods here is to cut 2 resolute reinforcements for the 2 wedding announcements, and that seems to be a very good move, I think, to be just due to the fact that resolute reinforcements is honestly the weakest of the creature package, and it's most likely the one you're going to end up being cut. So keep that in mind. If you're interested in Boros Koke for the RC, definitely consider this list. I'm debating about a very similar version of this and another deck I want to be covering in a little bit. I'm going back and forth. I'm going to have to try out both decks quite a bit this season, or beginning of next season, during my live streams, just so I can make sure I get that prep in for the RC. So, so like I said, I'm still on the fence which one I'm bringing. So next on my list, let's get into it, where it's going to be like 3 Boros decks back to back. Keep that in mind. Let's get into it. So next on my list is a deck that I really like in general. It is P and Alar, got a 5/0 with Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage. Very typical 1-drop selection from the deck. It, for some reason, is playing a Satyrs down here. Makes a 1/1. You escape it. I guess it's okay, but it seems very weak to me. But we do play P and Alar with Bone Crusher Giant, since you do cast them from exile. You get a 1/1 little Thopter. This deck, sadly, we don't have Chain of the Rocks on in Explorer, so I can't actually play the full-blown version of this deck. I would love to see Chain of the Rocks get reprinted, either, of course, in Pioneer Masters, or maybe even Foundations. Seems like this card could be a very good card for Standard, and I think it's actually pretty reasonable, right? Especially since you have Uri in the actual format, right? The brand new Enchantment Matters card, so that's actually kind of nice, I think. Chain of the Rock seems like a good card to be print in Foundations. Maybe it's too good. I don't think it is, though. We have 4 and 4 on the Resolves and Impulse draws. Fiery Impulse, 3 copies with 2 Helixes as our choice of removal spell. Then we have an additional, we actually have a Torch of the Tower 2. Then we have 1 Hazard as a land/removal spell. Sideboard, we do have 3 Brutal Cathars in the deck. I'm not really sure why this is preferred over other options, but I mean, it is a decent card overall. I just would have thought you would have went for even Skyclave Appetizers. Probably is better, but I'm not sure. Oh yeah, because Skyclave Appetizers interferes with Jax, so it makes sense. Then we have Invasion of Gomicon, kind of the same approach from the last deck. We bring it in against black-based decks, try to push off sweepers. Also against control, if we need to cut of course the Chain of the Rock for these, and the Showdown of the Skalds against control is our most optimal line, especially since we can push off Rafts a couple turns. Showdown the Skalds, extra card draw, pretty good. It also gives us a decent backup win con, where we just put a bunch of counters on our threats. So keep that in mind. It's a great way of closing the game out and grinding with our control player. 3 volleys for Spirits, Fang, and also Mono White Humans. So we could turn into a more of a mid-range deck, which is our main core reason why I love this deck as a whole in Pioneer, because it plays 2 different styles, all depending on the matchup. Because we're not the most aggressive deck in the format when it comes to aggro scale, right? But we do typically can get in there and get quite frisky and win the game. But against the more aggressive decks, we turn into the semi mid-range pile with a lot of card draw and a lot of spot removal. So against like something like Humans, we just trim back on our Swift Spears, go up our volleys, and then we become this mid-range pile that just answers threats all day. We do have a couple rest in peace for the Fang and the Phoenix matchup. 2 in the festivities for Elves. Also pretty good against Koke, like we just talked about. And that is our Boros Pia for Pioneer. Let's get into the last Boros deck. Let's get into it. So the last deck I'm considering for the RC here is Boros Heroic. Now, I am interested to talk about this particular deck. It's kind of all over the place when it comes to the creature package. We do play 4 Show-Offs, 4 Virtuosa, 4 Hoplites. You know, we cut back on our Swift Spears, so we can get 2 10th District Legionnaires in the deck. And honestly, I kind of like that as an approach. Now, the one thing I need to get into testing with is, of course, he's mainboarding the Flowstone. Also, I mean, I want to try the Crumb and Get It and the Boros Charm and Demonic Ruckus. I definitely would have to, if I go for this approach, I still have to pick up Boros Charm, Ruckus, and the Crumb and Get It. I don't think I own those cards yet. But the rest of it I do. And of course, it still plays Anger in our strikes. And our 4 Rages because it's just really good. We cut back on our Reckless Rages to only as a 2 of, which is a very interesting choice. We do have a God's Willing with our Shelter and our Crumb for protection, especially since exile-based removal is not as important. We have 2 Boros Charms to kind of also protect our threats, while also dealing 4 damage or giving something double strike, like a Show Off, which could just close the game out. And this also gives us stability when our creatures get removed or answered. We get to draw a card while giving our Show Off a menace, which is quite nice. And we get to plot it turn 1. So it kind of gives us a little bit more one-play action without actually committing to the board that can be answered. Sideboard, we have 3 Rest in Peace for Fang and Phoenix. 2 Rages for aggro, along with 2 Volleys, also for aggro if it's white or blue-based aggro. We have 2 Light of Hope for enchantment removal, so we can answer those pesky decks like Talent, Mono White, mid-range. We have Get Lost for Talent, other enchantment. You can answer a Planeswalker, Shieldred, whatever you want, for the most part. And the really grinding matchups, we have Showdown of the Scalds. Of course, we definitely will cut something like Anger for it, because we actively want to keep our creatures at a reasonable count, while also being able to grind with them, right? Because that's very important in those matchups. And I also like the fact that Infusion's Flowstone is also a removal spell in the main board. With our, I guess we do have 1 Rage here. So we're playing 3 Rages in total. And it seems like a decent number. And I like the fact that this is probably better than a Rage main board, because it's also a removal spell. It also can just pump something. So that's quite nice. Now, what gives this deck a competitive advantage over other aggro decks is the Hoplite. Mono, Phoenix is a top dog in the format. It's nice to have a card that just prevents the damage as a whole. So most of their removal is burn based, so keep that in mind. So that is Boros Heroic. And like I said, the only new cards we got in this deck is Crumb and Get It. And I believe there was 1 extra card. Yeah, that was last set. So yeah, just Crumb and Get It. So it is featuring some new cards, but not a lot. Let's get into the next list, which is another aggro deck that just kind of came out of nowhere. And I assume this is based off the concept of Saffron Olive played a budget Rakdos, hero deck in Standard. So someone decided to make their own version for Pioneer. We still play 2 Sellswords and 4 Claims as a way to get back our Show-Offs, our Code Breakers, our Challengers, Swiftspear or Hero. Hero can get very big. Even if you come on turn 1, Hero turn 2 gets a counter. And then you can maybe even add another counter to it, so it becomes a 3/3. Titan of Strength is a nice 1-drop +3/+1 type effect. Scry, which is really decent in the deck with Hero. We also have Hammerhand as a way to give the creature haste and also prevent a block. So I believe that's the main difference between this one and the new one. I don't think the new one grants haste. I could be wrong, but I do actively still wonder, is the Sellsword better than, I guess with Claim it's better than Thud? But you could answer the creature getting targeted by sword and kill it, but I don't know if that's actually worth, I don't know. But sideboard, we do have 4 pushes as the way to battle the mirror and other aggro decks. We have 3 Thoughtseizes or 4 Thoughtseizes for the control and combo. Also, make sure we get rid of Wrath-based effects from our opponent's hand and removal. Hurts for Graveyard Hate. It's really good against Phoenix and of course also Fang. We have 2 Ferocitons as a way to fight through mainly green, potentially, because green does come when they combo off. They do cast a lot of creatures into play. And that's a lot of excessive ping damage. And also, it's pretty relevant against Angels, which seems to be a legit contender in Pioneer right now, which is quite nice, actually, because I like Angels as a whole. Then we have 2 Forges. 4 decks, we expect a heavy amounts of removal. We could bring it in and just close the game out with like a 7-1 haster with trample. So that is Rattos aggro for Pioneer. Let's get into the next list. I am now offering Patreon and locals content exclusive. It includes sideboard guides, budget guides, exclusive videos, as well as other types of content. If you want to check out the link, it's in the description. Now let's get back into the video. So next on my list is the blue-white humans deck. Now it's been going around a little bit, which I think is quite interesting of a deck. The new card I picked up, of course, is Mockingbird. So it can come down, it can basically become any of our 1-drops, 2-drops, and it really helps because we get to maybe get another Thalia's Lieutenant, or maybe we get another Coppercoat Vanguard, give us more Lords, which really helps us put the game away. What's also quite interesting is we have 2 Imposing Sovereigns in this list at the very bottom here. Basically, is a human that makes our opponent's creatures ETB tapped. Very interesting card choice. Of course, since we are a very, 2-color deck, we get to play 4 copies of Mutavault in the mana base. And of course, we're playing Adeline, 4 Thalias, and 4 Lieutenants. They're just the best cards in humans with the Vanguard. Now, Reflector Mage, you could argue, is a better or worse than a Brutal Cathar. That's up for the debate, especially since Reflector Mage isn't as good as it used to be. It's also, maybe Brutal Cathar just works with Mockingbird, because if it flips, I don't know how that actually functions. I don't think it actually flips with Mockingbird. Then we have 3 Initiates, 3 Bodyguards, and then we have 4 Officers, because it's probably the best of the bunch. Just being able to be a card draw engine. Of course, we don't have Kythian on Arena, which kind of sucks. You can't really play this exact version there. I'm also pretty sure we don't have this Imposing Sovereign. It's not really a very well-used card. Even if you did, I mean, are you gonna waste a rare wildcard slot on that? I don't know. 4 Portable Holes for aggro. Also against Witch's Oven, which is quite important. 2 Get Lost for mid-range piles that have medium-sized threats. Also against enchantments. 2 Hearse for Phoenix, and also, of course, the Fang matchup. 4 Wedding Announcements for the Grinding matchup. Probably can, against Control, we can cut the Mage for it. Nice little exchange there. And depending on against Rattos, we could also cut something else that's not as important. And then we have 2 Brutal Cathars for a little extra removal if we need that. Then we have 1 Extraction Specialist also against heavy monster removal. We could bring it in and potentially just keep reanimating the threats so that they get Fatal Push. Now, that is our blue-white humans for Pioneer. Let's get into the last list before I start getting into the next video. Let's get into it. Last on my list is this weird Izzet deck that is basically Izzet Prowess, sort of. Now, this deck I found, which I thought was pretty interesting. It is playing 3 copies of Otter, which has Prowess 1/1. I'm not sure if that's actually ever better than the enchantment, but you never know. Because they kind of either, what's the difference between a token and an actual physical creature? One of them triggers Prowess, this one really doesn't since we don't have any green mana. We have Slip Through Space as a way to give ourselves unblockable. Shore Up to protect our threats. We have Reckless Monstrous Rage because it's just the greatest 1-drop spell in the format. Might of the Meek as a way to give our mice. We have 2 sets of 4 as a way to give them, trample, a counter, or whatever, prowess trigger, and draw a card. Now, weirdly enough, this deck is playing Curious Obsession as a way to draw extra cards. Now, this deck doesn't really actually play any kind of counter spells in the main, but we do leave up Shore Up as long as we keep drawing those to save our threats on the return. Maybe that's enough. Of course, this deck is playing Anger, because it does draw a card, gives something trample, makes it really big. We have our 4 show-offs and challengers as our 2-drop creature package, with Swifty and Hero being our 1-drops. Sideboard, we do have In the Festivities for elves, also, of course, Convoke. Volley for Convoke, Angels, Spirits, pretty much mono white humans. 2 Spell Pierces as a way to protect our threats post-board if you have heavy mounted removal. 3 Lizards as a way to fight through, Izzet Phoenix? Maybe even Lotus Field, depending on how that actually pans out. 2 Hearse for Phoenix and Fang. Then we have 3 Disputes as a way to fight through counter wars. And maybe even Spirits, because they typically do have a lot of cheap interaction and creatures that are blue. So it's kind of nice to have that ability to counter target non-creature spell or blue spell. And that is all the decks I have to cover for today. Like I said, the next half of this video is dropping tomorrow. So go ahead and check that out. And if you like my kind of content, be sure you smash that like button, subscribe, hit that notification alert for future videos. Let me know what you think of the series down in the comment section, and I will talk to you soon.